Just in time for Thanksgiving, Everytown for Gun Safety wants you to gather around the dinner table, give thanks, and argue with family members about guns, arming you with facts that are as real as that side is homemade that you bought from the frozen aisle. So let's take a moment, give thanks that anti-gun activists are so incredibly stupid, and debunk the debunkers with Gary Gunderson. Myth: criminals will always find a way to get their hands on guns. Fact: laws like background checks stop gun sales to criminals every day. Since 1994, these laws have blocked more than 4 million gun sales to people who could not legally own guns. Wow, so I guess no criminals have had any guns since 1994. Problem solved. Of course, their fact ignores the truth of the so-called myth. That yes, criminals still have guns and will always get guns because they are willing to do criminal acts to get them before using them. That's not a myth. Their fact is irrelevant to the myth it supposedly debunks, which will be an ongoing theme for the rest of their facts. Myth: guns don't kill people, people kill people. Fact: people with guns kill people, and more efficiently than people without guns. The U.S. gun homicide rate is 26 times higher than that of other high-income countries. The point behind this myth is that guns themselves are tools and need the action of a person to be deadly, unless it's a SIG. The U.S. gun homicide rate is irrelevant to this point. People kill each other every day very effectively without guns. The worst school massacres in history were committed with explosives, not guns. People use cars in crowds, go on mass stabbings. It is inarguably true that human evil will find a way to commit violence. Myth: federal law prohibits all domestic abusers from having guns. Fact: federal law does not prohibit current or recent former dating partners subject to a domestic violence restraining order from purchasing or possessing guns. The threshold for a domestic violence restraining order is not the same as a conviction, so this does not really hold water. Myth: strong gun laws don't work. Look at Chicago. Fact: Chicago proves why we must push for strong federal gun laws. Many of the crime guns recovered in Chicago and in other cities in states with strong gun violence prevention laws can be traced back to states with weaker gun laws. I thought criminals couldn't get their hands on guns. Didn't we debunk that? Wasn't that a myth? Regardless, what about all the illegal switches on Glocks in the streets of Chicago? Those are illegal everywhere. So who do you blame for that? The truth behind their fact is that no amount of gun control will ever be enough, because even if all guns are outlawed, there would still be guns in the hands of criminals. Every piece of data that doesn't match their narrative is an exception that proves their point in their mind. They always blame other states, which, while they have less strict gun laws, do not have the same crime rate as, say, Chicago. It makes me think it's not just the guns. Myth: a small child cannot pull a trigger. Fact: every year hundreds of children, and you know what, this is stupid because no one actually thinks this or would argue this as fact. It's obvious that guns can go off in the hands of a child. Myth: the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Fact: if more guns everywhere made us safer, America would be the safest country on earth. Instead, we have a gun homicide rate 26 times that of other high-income countries. I noticed their fact did not address the myth at all. How do you stop a bad guy with a gun? Certainly not with statistics. This myth is obviously true, and it's gun control activist groups that actually suppress places like the CDC from publishing the amount of times guns are used in self-defense a year, which inevitably saves lives. They want to obscure any possible positive firearms data to push their agenda. Myth: arming teachers will keep our kids safer in schools. Fact: arming teachers ignores research that shows the presence of a gun increases the risks posed to children and teachers. School safety experts and law enforcement oppose arming teachers. The source behind this fact is, let me check their sources, themselves. And if you take the time to read their source, it's an article pushing a laundry list of gun control agenda items in the name of making schools safe that keeps saying things like research suggests arming teachers places students at greater risk, but they don't reference any research about arming teachers at all. They link to research that says that generally, children are aware of where parents store firearms and could gain access to them, and that generally, access to firearms in a home increases risk. There is no research about arming school teachers at all. It doesn't exist. This is a blatant lie. They also act like all school safety experts and law enforcement are against arming teachers, which is simply not true. Their source even acknowledges the fact that arming teachers is gaining traction and support. Myth. We don't own guns, so I don't need to worry about my kids getting hold of one. Fact. 4.6 million U.S. children live in a household with at least one loaded, unsecured gun. Children and teens access guns in homes other than their own. You know what? I agree. Make the 4 rules of gun safety and gun handling part of the regular education for children so they know how to respect and treat firearms. But Everytown would be against that because it normalizes firearms. Myth. Having a gun for self-defense makes individuals and their families safer. Fact. Guns in the homes increase the risk that anyone in the house, including children, will die by firearm suicide or unintentional injuries. And domestic abusers with access to a gun are 5 times more likely to kill their female victims. Their fact ignores the possibility that a firearm can even be used for self-defense in the home at all. Much like the last presidential candidate they endorsed said.
If somebody breaks in my house, they're getting shot.
Yes, I hear.
Or that can be used in public for self-defense, and also can be used defensively by victims of domestic abusers against their attackers in a situation where they may be otherwise defenseless. Myth. Everyone already has to get a background check when buying a gun. Fact. Federal law only requires licensed dealers to perform background checks. That means that millions of guns are bought and sold by unlicensed sellers each year without one, often online or at gun shows. Guns bought online not being sent to a federal license holder is already illegal, so how's that for a myth? And if you believe the claim that millions of guns are sold this way each year, it's obvious that the problem is not that severe, as there are not millions of mass shootings. Myth. Red flag laws take guns from people without due process. Fact. Red flag laws, which authorize courts to issue orders to temporarily remove firearms from someone who is determined to be a danger to themselves or others, protects due process. Final orders can only be issued after the person is given notice and an opportunity to be heard. Red flag laws do ignore due process because they are removing a constitutionally guaranteed right without the commission of a crime. It'd be like saying you can temporarily remove the right to free speech if you petition a judge and say someone is spreading general misinformation. Their article states in a single sentence that if a red flag law is enacted, the guns they already own will also be held by law enforcement or another authorized party, which is a physical taking of one's property, again, without a crime being committed, and this act they just brush aside has resulted in death when someone did not willingly hand over their firearms. For a group that normally bemoans over-policing, even in many of the points made in this article, they don't hesitate to call the police when it comes to stripping firearms away from an individual. And in states, it can vary on who can call in this red flag law, a disgruntled ex, a neighbor. The possibility for abuse is coded within the very idea of red flag laws. Myth. Shoot first laws provide everyone an equal right to defense. Fact. Shoot first laws, which allow a person to use deadly force even when they can safely walk away, disproportionately impacts Black Americans. In shoot first states, homicides in which white shooters kill Black victims are deemed justifiable 5 times more often than when the situation is reversed. If there are justifiable homicides, I don't see an issue. Shoot first laws, as they put it, are good, because the alternative is duty to retreat, in which overzealous prosecutors have thrown the book at people defending themselves by concocting some imagined circumstance where they could have possibly ran away when they felt their life was in danger. I don't care how many are deemed justifiable if the circumstances are justifiable. That seems like justice to me. Also, just want to call out the virtue signaling of capitalizing black but not white within their text. Myth: gun violence affects black and white people in the U.S. equally. Fact: black people in the U.S. are disproportionately impacted by various forms of gun violence. They experience more than 12 times the gun homicide, 18 times the gun assault injuries, and nearly 3 times the fatal police shootings of white Americans. I don't believe anyone believes the myth they purport here. I think they just want to make a point themselves, establishing a race as a victim as part of their overall political agenda. It is factually true that gun violence disproportionately victimizes and is perpetuated by black people. Myth: active shooter drills make students and school staff more safe in the case of an active shooter. Fact: there is no evidence to show student participation in active shooter drills saves lives, and data shows they do cause trauma and anxiety. The best way to protect schools from school shootings are proven threat assessment programs and gun safety laws. It is difficult to assess this sort of data, as it would require uniform training across multiple schools that had school shootings and then control groups that didn't have any training at all. You'd also have to control for all sorts of other variables, such as the size of school, design of the building, to have any real discernible data. However, if you were to take their fact seriously, you should also argue that there's no point in doing a fire drill, tornado drill, or any safety drill at all. Try that, then say there is a fire and no students know what to do. So the teacher has to explain the best way to safely exit during the middle of a crisis. Or maybe the teacher stepped out of the classroom for a few minutes while they're doing independent study and there's no one to guide them. If that sounds like a recipe for disaster and panic, that's because it is. How they can argue that conducting a safety drill would have no positive impact on reactions during a crisis is utterly absurd and actually quite harmful if their advice is followed. Well, now that you've had a taste of the bowl that places like Everytown are shoving down the gullet of the silly turkeys that listen to them, enjoy your own turkey day, and remember that all gun laws are infringements. Let me know your own gun myths or talking points in the comments below. If you have made it to the end of the video, please consider supporting my Patreon, subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing it with others. Thanks for watching.